Welcome to day 2. Like most classes, we go over important things about the subject at hand as sort of a review before we get into the actual juicy part of the subject matter. One of the important things to remember about punk is that the reason why a lot of it is really quite ridiculously simple is because that was the whole point of it. There's a lot of the early punk, from the garage rock of the 60s and proto punk till, I'd argue, the pop punk explosion of the mid 90s into the late 2000s, is that a lot of that punk was defined by just an overall lack of musical ability. That's why it was simple. The chord progressions didn't make sense in a traditional music theory aspect. If any of you have seen It Might Get Loud, the movie with Jack White, Jimmy Page, and The Edge from U2. U2 is one of those bands that is rooted in punk music, and the Edge showed Jimmy Page, one of their punkier songs, and Jimmy Page could not make any sense of the chord progression that the Edge was using. The Edge showed him the chord progressions to the song, and Jimmy Page just standing there like, "What?" That's punk. It's simple. It's simple stuff to an extent, but it's arranged and set up like that because these people don't have the same kind of musical training but are still trying to express themselves musically anyway. There is no difference in the musical expression from the musical expression in the song Kick Out the Jams than there is in Jimi Hendrix' The Wind Cries Mary. No difference in the musical expression. They both conveyed whatever it is they were trying to convey. Jimi Hendrix just has a little bit has more natural ability as a guitarist than, Wayne Kramer did in the MC5. But with time, with the overall acceptance and explosion of punk rock on a much more widespread popular level, those bands that get tagged with, the greatest band in the world. Eric Clapton is nicknamed God, Bruce Springsteen the Boss. Well, The Clash, one of the most seminal punk bands of all time, have one of those titles. They are the only band that matters. With time, punk became, more about musical ability. It became more about the same kind of, aggression and simplistic expression that you saw in recordings like Kick Out the Jams or Raw Power, but you had people who could actually write songs in a more traditional music theory component. Mick Jones was a guitarist who knew how to write a pop song, who knew how to sing. Joe Strummer, it was either, he had, his approach to vocals was not trained and a lot more uncouth in compared to Mick Jones, but Mick Jones' voice wasn't punk. It wasn't the same kind of raw, aggressive expressionism that would have made The Clash the kind of punk band that they were. Most of the early Clash hits were all written by Mick Jones, but sung by Joe Strummer. I think I would argue that the more well-known Mick Jones sung song is Lost in the Supermarket, and that came out in 1979, the tail end of 79, on The Clash's third album, London Calling. But of course, with the evolution of new genres, it would revert back to that kind of simplistic expressionist approach with, just lack of music theory understanding. When you look at the early hardcore punk movement, you look at an album like Damaged from Black Flag, there's not really a clear tonal sense to a lot of the songs on that album, but that's what made it hardcore. It was faster than punk. It was more aggressive than what punk was. But, like I said, there's no difference in the way things, the way that the feelings and thoughts were expressed in a song that came off of Damage than any of the songs off of Nevermind the Bollocks. And like I said, with each passing evolution of, just punk music, the musical and technical abilities got tighter, got more concise, and the production quality started to improve. Another example of where the, actual musical ability, music talent, and music theory knowledge improved is, look at ska. Ska punk is defined by the horn section, but you have to have a rock solid horn arrangement so that it fits with the chord progression, fits with the vocal melody, but doesn't detract from the vocal melody. But you still need to have people who understand horn arrangements in order to make those work. You look at the pop punk music. That is more clearly defined by an understanding of what makes a pop song unique. There is more of a focus on melodic singing. There is more of a focus on, improved production techniques. But again, there is no difference in the more aggressive pop punk songs and how things are expressed than there was back with Fresh Fruit for Rotting Tomatoes by the Dead Kennedys. You can argue that Billy Joe Armstrong is much more of a singer than Jello Biafra ever was, but Jello Biafra could still express himself in a way that let him feel fulfilled as a musician. And the simplistic approaches have been due largely in part to a lack of musical ability. That is why there are so many simplistic chordal arrangements to these songs. But you look at every punk band that ever has been in existence, and even if they can't express themselves in a coherent, traditional music theory, pop theory kind of way, they still express themselves in a way that is distinctly punk, but there is still absolutely no difference between the way that a Nazi punk singer expresses his feelings than the way Marvin Gaye expresses his feelings in any of his recordings. Granted, the Nazi punk singer is probably expressing frustration with more controversial subject matter than Marvin Gaye, but he still feels fulfilled as an individual and as an artist for being able to express himself in that fashion, as is the case with Marvin Gaye.